Very good evening and welcome back to our series on Bible science. And I trust you are finding this series not just informative, but it is also helping us to understand God's creation in a way that He created it. And I trust and I am excited that this will lead us to revere God more, to worship Him, and to understand with our minds also how great is our God. You know, very recently I was watching this debate between John Lennox and uh, another gentleman, and I was finding this very interesting because Richard Hawkins, he does not seem to really understand, he doesn't really want to understand that God exists, and he's quite adamant to the fact that no, everything just came by itself, and there is no designer behind all that we can see. And I believe the times that we are living, science has given a lot of material to people to actually talk against God. In fact, that God even exists. And that, I believe, my brothers and sisters, this is so important for us, especially in times that we are living, to understand that not only He lives, not only He is the creator, but He is personally, and He wants to develop relationship with you and I. And many times when we want to just understand by logic and we want to understand God with our mind, we sort of miss out on his greatness, or even how we can even come to know Him, because God makes Himself known by revelation. And for revelation, faith is absolutely important. Faith is actually, without faith, it is impossible to please God. And in fact, we can even go ahead and say, without faith we cannot even meet with God, because it's only by faith that we meet with God. So I believe for us as Christians, though it is important for us, though we know, I beg your pardon, though we know that God is there, and because He has changed our life, but yet for us it is important to understand creation, to understand His universe, to understand things that He has displayed through science, and sort of understand that, so that we are able to better explain to those who are skeptics about our God. So let us, I want to take us back to our discussion, and I want to just begin where we left last time. And this is about day zero. In fact, we were looking at day zero, and I just want us to just to look at it once again, and what I shared that day was precisely that God was involved in creation through a process. So creation was in the making through a process. And I believe this is so important for you and I to understand, that God did not simply bring in existence the universe without the process. And that's what we saw, that it took almost 9.4 billion years, if you look in this time frame, that this is how long it took for day zero, because God selects the earth. He selects a waterless earth, and that's what precisely it is talking about. And he begins to to work on this on the earth, which was a water world, to cultivate life in it. The thick atmosphere prevents light from reaching the earth's surface, and that's what we were we were discussing last week. Now today I want to go to day one of creation. So I want to put this slide here, day one, and we are going to look at this today. And I trust not only day one, we will also be able to cover day 1 and 2 and have an understanding of what this means. So let's look to Genesis chapter 1 verses 3 and 4. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light, and God saw the light that it was good. Now, from the point of Earth's surface, as you can see on the screen, the thick early atmosphere became thin enough to be translucent, not exactly transparent, but it was translucent. That means it was still foggy, but light was able to penetrate, and therefore light from the sun reached the earth's surface. The light of the sun already existed, just so that we understand this, but it did not reach the surface of the earth until the atmosphere and cloud cover became less dense. Now this is important for us to understand, because God is working on the earth in a process, and because of the atmosphere, of the high temperature in the atmosphere, the earth is sort of cooling down. Now this can easily compare to the transformation on the earth's early atmosphere as described by the scientists. Now if we look at it, much of the initial bulk of the atmosphere was lost into space early in the Earth's history. The early atmosphere contained large amounts of hydrogen and hydrogen-containing compounds, which were stripped away by the solar winds by about 4 billion years ago. So, with this concept, we are trying to build this understanding. If you look on your screen, God is causing the atmosphere to become translucent. I mean, that's the main understanding here. Earth's atmosphere is gradually altered because of the solar winds, chemistry, it's cooling off, and other processes which is transforming the atmosphere. So the sun already exists, but because of the thick atmosphere, it is going through that process, and that's very important for us to actually get a grasp of this, because if we don't, then basically what happens is we begin to understand that it just, it is a light, and it's a light from nowhere, because the sun was created on the 4th day, but that's not exactly what the Bible is saying. So this is what we see on when God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now we move on to day 2. In day 2, we find that God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And in fact, if you remember, when I started the series 3 weeks into the series, I explained this as an example. But today, let's understand this in a more exciting way, in a more deeper way. Now, in this on day 2, this is where we find that God has already instituted the laws of nature that is actually begin to take effect, because God works through process, and he initiates a process here. The fog lifts from the surface and the cloud cover is reduced as temperatures are dropping, and temperatures are dropping because earth is sort of cooling. Planet formation models predicts that the earth would have gone through the phase of gradual cooling. Now uh, this has been sort of tested and worked through model creation under scientific observation. Now, as it cooled, evaporations from the oceans would have been reduced, and less water would remain in the atmosphere as clouds, because the earth is sort of cooling. Now, remember when we talked about the earth starting from a minuscule and then expanding with intense heat, so the atmosphere is extremely hot, and then over a period of time, which is hundreds of billion of years, hundreds of millions of years, it is sort of cooling down. It is in that process. Large amount of volcanism or the extensive meteor activity during the late heavy bombardment, which is actually which happened 3.85 billion years ago, may have further altered the composition of the atmosphere. Now, once again, I want to reiterate that the forces of nature are tools of God. As science detects the natural forces at work, we see biblical writings. They are saying the same events with the acknowledgement of the divine cause. So this is where we see that on the first 2 days, that the clouds are sort of being lifted and water is reduced in the atmosphere because of what we see is happening, because the earth temperature is cooling, and that is why we see this process which actually is taking effect. Now, it's very important for us to understand that this whole process is taking significant time, as you can see this. And why it is taking significant time? Because natural events, when you look at it, it involves a process time, and this is what science has been able to put its finger and say this is how long it has taken. And in the scriptures, as I always say, the Bible is not a science book. It is not a book on astronomy. It is a book which actually explains. It talks about the purposes of life. It talks more from relation aspect with God, the spiritual aspect, but yet it does not nullify. It does not walk away from what the scientists are finding. Now, I just want to give you example before we go to day 3. I was just thinking about this and studying. Just a thought came to my mind. When you buy a refrigerator, you get a manual how to use the refrigerator, but it does not give you the details of the engineering that is behind the operation of the refrigerator, because that's not what a manual is supposed to do. The manual is simply talking about how to use the refrigerator. It is not giving us details about the engineering which goes about the cooling effect in the deep freezer and all that you see in your fridge at home. So likewise, we have to make that distinction, that Bible is just giving us how to use, how to live by the laws which he has given for you and I to live, but it does not go into deep explanation of the engineering behind this. However, when science comes up with the engineering aspect, we are more than happy. As Christians, we should be excited. Yes, now here we can come to a point of we can conject these things. This is where we can see how even the science behind the refrigerator would make you little more understandable. You would have little more understanding of when of why there is ice in the deep freezer, because you begin to understand a little bit the engineering. That's what this endeavor is, my precious brothers and sisters, as we are doing this series of the Bible and science, so that you and I can understand creation from that perspective. The Bible does not explain it from how astrophysicists would explain or scientists would explain, but yet in this series I want to make this analogy so that we understand the context of and why it is important for us to actually work with science, because it actually conjectures in the process. Now let's move on to day 3. I think this is something which is very, very exciting, and I trust that today we would like to cover the day 3 of the creation. And in this we find, then God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry ground appear. Now, and it was so. Now, science describes the bulk of the Earth's crust forming over a billion-year period, because this is what science is explaining. Midway through the development of the Earth, from 3 billion years until 2 billion years, as you can see on the side, the formation of continents occurred after a long age of minimal land mass. And it is important for us to understand this aspect of how the waters were separated. Now, when God says, let waters be gathered together into one place and let the dry land appear, God creates land by natural systems of plate tectonics that he put in place. That is what is happening actually. The Bible implies that all the land was together in one supercontinent. And that's what we see in, if that's what the science also comes up with. This is known to have happened many times throughout geological history. Now, over this period of time, most of the Earth's crust was formed during high level of tectonic activity, as I said. Over half of Earth's landmass is formed during this time. So this is, when the Bible says, let waters be gathered into one place and let the dry land appear, this is an understanding that the natural system of plate tectonics is actually taking place, and because the Earth, if you look in now, the Earth was formless and void. If Genesis 1 and 2, this is, and darkness was on the face of the deep. So the Earth was all covered with water in the first place. Now here we find that because the Earth is cooling down, there is that the clouds are lifting up. So naturally the water is sort of separating, and then with the movement, the land mass is now coming to its place, to the place that it is supposed to come under this movement of tectonic plates. Now, this is important for us to understand, because this becomes the foundation of for us to actually understand what does this mean. Now, and the other thing is an interesting aspect of the wordings of divine commands throughout the creation week is the use of the word let. If you look in the scriptures, it says let instead of the word like, make, or create. as it is in the beginning, God created. But then here we find the Bible is saying, is not using the word, God is not using the word create, but he's saying, let dry land appear. Now, what if we put this in context, what is happening here is that this does not mean that God was not the ultimate cause of these events. In fact, he commanded them to occur from the spiritual perspective, but it simply means that the use of natural forces in the orchestration of each creative act is taking its effect. As we stated earlier, as I said in the beginning, the forces of nature are indistinguishable acts of God, because it's God who set up the laws of nature. Now, this is what we find in day 3, because there are two activities that is happening on day 3. The first is that the land is appearing, and the land is appearing because of these movements. Now, if you look on your screen, that's precisely what it's trying to explain. Almost 3.0 to 2.0, basically 1 billion year, the Earth underwent massive crust building. And why this period is because this is the period that the scientists conclude would have taken for Earth's crust formation, with all sorts of things that was actually going on during that point of time. Then, as we continue, verse 11, and God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind. Now, I find this very, very interesting. After the formation of land, God gave the command for plant life to appear on the earth. Now, God commands the vegetation to grow from the ground. Now, this is a strong case for a metaphorical day representing more than 24 hours during the creation week, because plants take more than 24 hours to be fully grown, unless we again accept that God simply planted trees and all that. So this is sort of, once again, it speaks that these were days. These were not just physical days, these were long periods of time. Now, though plant fossil older than the oldest animal species have not yet been found, there's a strong DNA and molecular evidence for plant life by 700 million years ago. And this is preceding the Cambrian explosion in Earth's history. And we can actually put this together, what the Bible is saying, the plant life. This may also have simply represented any organism capable of photosynthesis. Photosynthetic microorganisms have existed for at least 2.78 billion years, as indicated in the fossil record. This would have been during the time of continent formation on day 3. Now, this is an account of beginnings, with plants having their beginnings in the specified sequence. Now, please understand, the point of this passage is a generalization to indicate when plant life began. It's not at all intended to claim that all plant species currently existing came into existence at that point of time. As I just said, that there are fossils that appear for 2.8 billion years ago, because the listing of new or few types of plant like trees, herbs, etc., are here to help us to understand, and you and I to understand, and even the original people to understand, that it is plant life that is being described, since the original plant forms would have been unfamiliar to ancient people. Some translations use the word vegetation instead of grass, and seed-bearing plants instead of herb. The original text is not as specific as some translations imply. The term vegetation is not a rigorous scientific defined term, so it could very well have included things like algae, lichens, fungus, and other forms of stationary multicellular life for which science says that it was found 2.78 billion years away, because the vegetation part of it is an indication of what is happening at that point of time. Now, these are known to have existed before animal life. Also, listing a few different plants make it clear that all forms of plant life, past and present, exist due to the action of God. Now, very, very important for us in concept to understand that this is the plant life that came into existence took this many years to surface, and included moss-like species, as I just said. Lichens and algae also flourished because their fossils have been found. Now, this in short actually explains how day 3 was when God said, let there be, and let there be, let the waters come, and let the earth sprout vegetation. It basically means that it took this many years for this to actually come to pass, so that what we see now is a result of the process that happened several millions years ago. And why we say this with confidence, because science is actually in alignment with the word of God. And that's why, I repeat this all the time, that there is no separation. If we are able to just remember the example of the refrigerator, using the device and the engineering behind the device, but then in the same context, we can take the universe, the creation, with the scientific analysis and what the Bible is saying. Now, let me just put a synopsis from day 1 to day 3. If you just look on your screens, this is basically what it's saying. So day 1, light on the earth. Now, if you look at, I may just make a little more bigger for us to see. So it's the thinning of first atmosphere. So if you see in the first, it's translucent, and then it becomes clear. Day 2, clouds are. Day 1, it's light on the earth. Now this light is coming not because sun was planted on that day. And we will see in day 4 that when the Bible said, let the lights come, sun already existed in the beginning. But then because of the earth's temperature, and because of that gases, and because of that cloudy, and I mean cloud of hydrogen, and cloud of atmosphere that had all this, because of atmospheric pressure, these things are lifted up. So light is able to come because it's the thinning of the atmosphere. Day 2, the clouds are lifting. The reason the clouds are lifting, we just saw, is because the earth temperature is sort of now cooling down and reduced, and therefore there is reduced water in the atmosphere. Day 3, we find land appearing because of the movement of the tectonic plates, and taking the period to be these many years. Continent formation is almost from 3 billion years to 2 billion years, a period of almost 1 billion years, according to scientific analysis. And then we find marine life appear in first plants, and these plants would include algae and fungus and all that which we talk about. But the Bible just mentioned vegetation. It does not mean that it's only limited to this. So I trust, as this is helping us together to understand that creation was a process, and God initiated creation through natural laws. And when these natural laws began to function, we find that things are happening as in accordance to the law of process. It's a process that began to take effect, and I trust and that you and I are able to comprehend this in simple language. Though I'm some of the times I'm using language which contains words, but it is just to explain in simple facts that this was a process which involved certain things to happen. So the day one, we find light coming because atmosphere is clearing. Day two, the clouds are being lifted up, and atmosphere clears more. Day three, we find continents are coming together. It's a time taking process. Science puts it from 3 billion year to 2 billion year, 1 billion year of formation, which is quite understandable because we look at tectonic plates movement under on the Earth's crust. It is how the process happens. And then once that process is settled, when that comes to rest, plant would show up. That's what basically it means. So I trust in all this, we are able to see the greatness of God. We are able to see his minute details, his intelligence, his omniscience, his creation taking effect through the laws which he initiated. And once again, I want to conclude by saying, as we look into this in detail, as we move on to day 4 and day 5 and day 6, as we understand further, I trust that this is building in us more reverence and awe for God, who is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the Creator, and yet he loved us so much that he sent his only Son to die for you and for me. He gave his life so that we can know him personally. What an amazing God! What an amazing love, and what an amazing privilege he has given. The God of this universe chose to give his Son for you and me. I trust this will build in you more love, more awe for the living God. Have a very good evening and God bless. And when we come again, we look at day 4, which is very interesting, and we'll try to finish day 4 and day 5 in our next session. Have a very good evening once again. Bye-bye.